Hey, here we are, going live. This is the March 24th episode of the York Tech Report. Today, my name is Kevin Brickhauser. I'm Director of Technology.
My name is Ryan Meckel. I'm a Tech Officer.
And I'm Kevin Barnard. I'm the other Tech Officer.
So we're figuring out what this podcast is all about, but we want to come to you on a somewhat regular basis and talk about technology at York. And we thought that it'd be a good idea to talk about passwords. Probably the bane of a lot of people's existence. Just like, how do we keep track of so many passwords? And the thing is, we Americans in general are terrible at passwords. You know, recently, I think was it Twitter's password database got hacked, and they realized that the most popular passwords were like password,
right?
1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah,
just the worst passwords in the world. So easy to hack. And so we thought we'd come up with some strategies for coming up with better passwords. First of all, what should not be your password? Do you have any ideas of how to avoid bad passwords? What are bad passwords?
Just one word, I would think. Your name, anything that has to do with your birthday or where you live.
Yeah.
Something that's like super easy to guess. Like if your sibling or your parents could guess it, or one of your relatives could guess it, it's probably not a good password.
Right. Yeah. Nothing that's in the dictionary. If there's a word that's in the dictionary, it's a bad password, because hackers use a strategy called, what's it called, brute force attack, where they basically just send passwords at a crazy rate, like 500 passwords a second. They'll try, and it's really fast to go through all the words in the dictionary. And then yeah, pet names been overused. Anyone can guess what your pet name is. Anyone can look up on Google. I can find out what your birthdays are in a second. That's not gonna trick anybody. Let's see. So some ways that people have gotten around that is by like replacing the letter E with the number 3.
Sure. That
used to be a cool thing to do, but I don't think it's useful anymore. Yeah. I think the hackers have figured that one out and include that in their brute force attacks. So, so what do you guys do? What are your passwords?
Yeah, so
I have, don't tell us your passwords. I'm kidding.
Yeah, I have quite a long password. I have a 15-character password, and it's a mixture of $signs, lowercase characters, uppercase characters, numbers, pretty much anything you can imagine. It's just all symbology, pretty much, and it's completely random. Nothing to do with me. You could never guess it in a million years, and it would take a hacker thousands of years just to crack it.
Right.
Mine's just it's just a word that I came up with back in middle school that a few people know, and then a series of different numbers, and I usually capitalize the letters in that just randomly depending on the site that I use.
Right.
So if you did figure out my password for one thing, you could probably guess it, and everything else after a little while. But it's definitely not as secure as yours. But I think it would be pretty hard to guess.
So what about using, let's say you have like one killer, really long password that's impossible for anybody to guess, and you've got it memorized. Can you use that password for multiple different accounts?
So technically you could, but of course the issue is once a hacker gets one, and there are other ways to get it than brute force, of course.
Right.
Yeah, then they can get access to everything you have, which is really what you want to get away from. So as many passwords as you can, the better. Yeah,
so it's generally a bad idea to repeat the use of a single password, which adds to this major problem. You've got, I don't know, how many different accounts do you guys have?
More than 50.
I think I've got more than 100.
More than 100.
Yeah, more than I could possibly memorize a separate, unique password for each individual account. So is there any strategy for that?
Yeah.
What's that?
There's extensions like mSecure and 1Password. It'll generate a completely random password for you.
Right.
And remember it for you.
So mSecure, I've never heard of that one. 1Password I've heard of. LastPass I've heard of. I know security experts recommend LastPass, and probably these other sites as well. So how does that work?
It's like for Chrome, they have an extension. So you just you have a new account on Google or something. So you click the little extension button, it generates like a random password of numbers, characters, and letters.
Yep.
And then it'll put it in there, and every time you need to log into that site, it'll automatically just place it in the little password box for you while you log in.
Now, does that mean that what's the service called?
1Pass.
1Pass. Does that mean 1Pass knows all of your passwords?
1Pass would know all of your passwords, but it's locally stored, so it's not actually in any server.
So people who work at 1Pass don't know all of your passwords. That's the important thing. Like, it's fully encrypted, but if you lose your 1Pass password, all of those passwords are gone because they can't recover it because they don't have access to it. They don't want to have access to it because it makes them vulnerable. So it's fully encrypted on their end. They can't see it, but they have the software local on your computer that's generating these passwords, right? And so that's a pretty solid tactic. I think most security experts will support that. What do you guys think about? I know Chrome, Firefox, Safari. I'm not sure. Maybe Windows does as well. They'll offer to store your passwords as well on the device as well. I've heard mixed things about that, about using that service. Have you guys used that at all?
Yeah, well, so I've read a lot about that actually, and up until pretty recently, I'd say at least 5 years or so, those passwords that they kept in the browsers were kept as plain text, so completely unencrypted.
That's a problem.
So there were these USBs that hackers could really just put a tiny little bit of code on, stick it in a computer, it'll access that browser's files, and then steal all of your passwords in under a second.
Right.
So yeah, when you save it in a browser, if it's an old browser, then that's an issue.
Right.
But recently, browsers have kind of smartened up and they're starting to encrypt all of those passwords.
Right.
But still, just to be safe, I would keep it somewhere other than your browser.
Right. I actually do use the browser, the Chrome version of it, but I've got my device itself behind a password.
Yeah.
If I didn't, then that would be a really dangerous thing to do, right? I mean, in fact, you should put all of your devices behind a pretty good password. But yeah, if someone had access to my computer and could get into the computer, then theoretically they could find all my passwords because you can recover those through the browser. You can decrypt them. What about, I know some people have created like an algorithm to help them memorize a password. So they've got basically a certain keyword and a few key numbers, and then the password changes a little bit based upon, I don't know, the title of the service that they're using. So if it's Facebook, then they use something with regard to the word Facebook that changes the nature of the password. Have you heard of people using that? I've heard that recommended by experts for a long time, although recently I've been reading that hackers now can pretty easily figure out those algorithms as well. If they have access to a couple of your passwords, then they can pretty easily figure out what your pattern is for that. Yeah, so that's getting now increasingly being frowned upon as well. The other thing that I want to talk about is two-factor authentication. Do either guys use two-factor?
Yes.
Can you talk about what that is, what that means?
So basically what it is, so if you're logging into a service such as Facebook or Google, you put in your username, so you put in your email, you click go, and then you put in your first password. This is the password that you put in that you remember and that you always have with you in your brain. And then once you do that, it'll send you a text. Usually it'll send you a text or an email, and then with a separate password that's random every time. So you click that button and it verifies that that is you, and it'll get sent through to the site.
All right, so in order to get into your service, what you need is access to your initial password and also access to your own email, which again,
external, or your phone.
Yeah, sure, or your phone, which again, you can put behind another layer of security, right? A password on your email or a password to get into your phone. And
the idea behind that is that even if your hacker guesses your first password, they're probably not going to have your phone at hand with your text messages coming in.
So two-factor is that there's two layers of protection. The first is something the password, and then the second thing is something that you have, which is often your phone, or if you use Google's two-factor authentication, you can also print out a little card that has 6 different unique codes. Each one is disposable. Every time you use one of those codes, you cross it out and use the next one. You can actually keep that code in your wallet. So basically, we think about a lot of the hackers out in other countries overseas, even if I published my password to my Google account, if I gave my password right here, no one listening would be able to access it because they would also need to have my phone. I've got a little app on my phone called Authenticator, which is a generator. Every 60 seconds, it generates a new 6-digit code, and then I have to type that in when I use a new device. I'm tempted to make two-factor authentication for our Google account mandatory for everybody. You think it's a good idea or a bad idea?
I mean, I think people should have the option to put it on, I think, for the school account.
What's the downside? I see a huge downside to forcing people to do it.
If you forget your phone and you come into class and you need to log in, you're like, oh, I can't turn my assignment in because I didn't bring my phone with me.
Right. It does add a bit of complexity in logging to your devices. And some people have a hard enough time as it is, and they think that adding this other layer makes passwords even more complicated. And in some ways that they do. But I would also argue is that you don't need an absolutely ridiculously long password if you have two-factor turned on. And I'm one of these people. I've always got my phone by me. And then I also do have the backup codes in my wallet, just in case. Don't steal my wallet. Good. So hopefully that gives you some help with keeping track of all your passwords. Another thing, have you seen people who write down the passwords somewhere? Yeah. What do you think about that?
I keep some passwords in my desk. Oh, great! Now they know.
Now everybody knows.
I'm gonna have to move those, but for now I keep them in my desk for some of the super long ones, like my bank account password.
Right.
That I don't.
We should talk about that. Yeah.
I don't want anyone to see, and I think as long as maybe it's like a little scrap of paper that no one's gonna take note of if they're looking through your stuff. I think it's probably, that's pretty safe. Yeah.
Just don't put your password under your keyboard.
Yeah.
That's the first place everybody looks, right? But I think that, if you're doing something like that, I think that we need to write down some of these things just to keep track of all of them if we're not using a service like LastPass. But I wouldn't actually write down the passwords. I would write down hints that would give you a clue to, oh yeah, that's what your password is. And then another trick is, I was reading, is if you can get an invisible ink pen and grab one of the whatever number of books you have on your bookshelf. So for mine, it's not, but it could be War and Peace, page 300. In invisible ink has all of my passwords written down there. I've heard that people use that as a strategy. And that sounds like a pretty solid solution. Only you would know where to find them and know how to find them. So anyway, good. Any other final thoughts on passwords?
Not particularly.
Don't share your passwords with anybody. They should be yours and yours alone. All right, thanks for watching the Tech Report. See you next time.
All right.